This is the answer to your cry for help. Do you want to buy a house, support a family, send kids to college, and retire in style? And do all of these seem desperately out of reach? The Money Book was written to address the specific financial reality that young people face today, and it offers a set of real, not impossible solutions to the problems at hand and the problems ahead. Concisely, pragmatically, and without a whiff of condescension, Suze Orman tells her young, fabulous, and broke readers precisely what actions to take and why. Over the course of 10 chapters that can be consulted methodically, step by step, or on a strictly need-to-know basis, Suze takes readers past broke to a secure place where they'll never have to worry about revisiting broke again. And she begins the journey with a bit of overwhelmingly good news. Young people have the greatest asset of all on their side: time. Chapter 1. Know the score. The first chapter is all about credit score, what it means, how to get it, and how to improve it. Most of the main part of the chapter lays out how a credit score is defined, which is almost exactly the same as Wikipedia's definition of a credit score. Suze's advice is spot on here. Knowing exactly how a credit score is defined is the biggest key to knowing how to improve it, as most common mistakes with improving a credit score are simply the result of not understanding what's going on. She wisely gives you the advice that you should only get your score from the government or directly from Experian, Equifax, or TransUnion. She points out that the most interesting problem is slowly paying down your credit card debt and planning to cancel each card as you get your balances to zero. For the love of God, don't do this, because she explains how our oldest credit cards are part of the foundation of your credit report. If you cancel your earliest cards, your credit rating will go down as you are choosing to shorten the length of your credit history, which is a significant factor in calculating your score. She suggests cutting them up instead of putting them away in a lockbox somewhere. Chapter 2. Career Moves. The general point of this chapter is that if you're not happy at your job, you find a different one or subject yourself to a lifetime of misery, which is something no one wants. Since this book is targeting 20-somethings, this is good advice because you're at the very point in your life where a career change is most appropriate, before the burdens of a marriage, a home, and children begin to force you to remain employed. Some of her advice here is kind of odd though, because she encourages using credit cards for necessities if you're working a job that pays very poorly but has strong potential to pay a lot more in the future. So the most common problem would be people who hate their jobs wanting to go back to school, which, as the author says, is a very bad idea. Why? Because it prolongs the inevitable challenge of finding strong employment, increases your debt burden, and also gets you started in the workplace at an older age. For most people, going back to school is a crutch to lean on because they can't get it done. Chapter 3. Give yourself credit. Suze is often just fine with credit cards, and this chapter is basically about how to use credit cards in a sane and sensible manner. They can be used as tools, but the problem is that the modern consumerist society is basically set up to encourage people to spend beyond their means, in which people bringing in $130,000 a year are buying Ferraris and million-dollar homes. Marketing has become so effective that for many people it makes the debt risk seem trivial in comparison, and then suddenly they find themselves in desperation. Thankfully, this chapter bookends the use a credit card advice with some sense, like making sure that the things you buy are actually necessities, and that eating out, for example, is not a necessity. So if the problem is having hefty balances on 5 credit cards being your only debt, and you want to pay them off but don't know where to start, the author suggests paying the minimum balance on all of them, but paying as much extra as you can on the one with the highest interest rate. Once that's paid off, move on to the others. This is the route to paying the least amount possible in finance charges. Chapter 4. Making the grade on student debt. Student loans may be the best investment you make in your life because a college degree increases your earnings potential by a large amount. However, walking out of school into an uncertain marketplace with a load of debt is certainly frightening. However, there are also a lot of things working in your favor, such as a low interest rate, tax-deductible interest, and the fact that you are now holding a college degree are all big positives. If you don't have a degree but you think you're capable of earning one, student loans are well worth it. As for consolidation, you should do this when the interest rates are low and you can lock in a rate. Otherwise, it's not worth it. Chapter 5. Save Up. This chapter's focus is on the concept of living a bit frugally so you can afford important things like a cash emergency fund and also have the ability to save for major purchases, such as cars, so that you aren't eaten alive by yet another loan with a strong interest rate. Most of the ideas in this chapter are pretty low-key and sensible, but it takes commitment not to just take that new extra money and spend it on other stuff. The chapter seems to be missing one important part: taking that newfound money and automatically depositing into an emergency fund account. So if you want to start a savings account but everyone tells you to pay off your credit cards first, now you're confused, right? The author says that this is generally true, but that the real answer comes from comparing the interest rates. So if your savings account returns 5% and you have a 4% credit card, then you should have your money in a savings account. However, most people have credit cards with interest rates in the 18% range and a savings account that's far, far lower. And if this is you, then get those credit cards paid off as soon as possible. Chapter 6. Retirement Rules. This book really hits the target audience on the head, and no other chapter shows it as this one does. Right at the front, it says that unlike your grandparents and your parents, you are going to be on your own for funding your retirement, which is a vital message to Generation Y. If the point wasn't clear enough, another huge font header a few pages later says that you have been dealt a tough hand and that this requires getting an early jump on your retirement savings because your best friend is time. The chapter is filled with pretty typical retirement information such as starting an employee-matched 401k or 403b plan immediately and getting a Roth IRA if at all possible. But the message is very loud and clear. You'd better get started because the baby boomers are going to suck the pot dry before you get old enough, so it's up to you to save for yourself. Chapter 7. Investing Made Easy. The first 6 chapters of the book felt as if they laid a good foundation for financial stability, while the last 4 chapters focus on more detailed topics. This chapter basically compresses the basics of investing in stock down to about 15 pages. So it basically says that you should buy some stock-based mutual funds and focus at first on ones that cover the whole market, like index funds. Given that this book is intended for 20-somethings, this advice is spot on. Chapter 8. Big Ticket Purchase. Car. This chapter is full of great advice about buying a car that will disappoint people who want a Lexus straight out of college. So leases are a ripoff, and the best deal is a late model used car that isn't ultra showy, and the more cash you can pay, the better off you'll be. And we can agree that all of these points are very true, right? So if you use your car 50% for business, and even with the drawbacks of leasing, you figure out that the tax break makes it a good deal for you, then you need to figure out that whenever you use a tax break to justify a purchase, you're getting ripped off because leases are simply a giant ripoff that in the end leaves you with nothing except your empty wallet. Chapter 9. Big Ticket Purchase. Home. This chapter starts off with a great 20-page walkthrough of the home buying process, along with a lot of encouragement about how good of an investment a home purchase is. This chapter is great if you know nothing at all about the home buying process, but even for someone who has researched the topics and is getting ready for their first purchase, it is a real gloss over. Chapter 10. Love and Money. Yes, a love and marriage chapter finishes out the book. It gives very good, solid, and simple advice to make sure you and your significant other are on the same page financially, because there will be big problems if you're not. This chapter is great if you're in a relationship that's not incredibly serious yet, but you want some guidance on how the finances will work if you do take the plunge. So if you're dating someone who you really like personally but hate financially, that it's a problem, because the way a person handles their finances is a character trait that will eventually show up in other dimensions of life. And if you have problems with the way they handle their finances already, it will only get worse and other problems might crop up too. So think about it carefully before you take any sort of plunge.